This is the Almost Timely newsletter for the week of October 1st, 2023. Content authenticity statement. 95% of this newsletter was generated by me, the human. There are a couple of outputs of ChatGPT featured in the main article. There's a link also as to why these content authenticity statements are important, so please do go read that. All right, what's on my mind this week? How large language models work, a new explanation. I've been working on a more thorough way of explaining how large language models do what they do. Previously, I had explained large language models and how large amounts of text were digested down into statistical representations. And while this is accurate and true, it's hard for people to visualize. It's hard for you to say, okay, I can see what a matrix of probabilities around language looks like. That's tough. So let's tackle this in a new way with word clouds. Now, to be clear, this is a vast oversimplification of the mathematics behind large language models. Right? If you enjoy calculus and linear algebra and vectorization, and you want to dig into the actual mechanics of how large language models do what they do, how the mathematics of it, I recommend reading the paper that started it all. It's called Attention is All You Need. It's a 2017 paper by Vaswani et al., and you will get the real deal and can see all of the inner workings of these tools. So, with that said, take any word, and there are words associated with it. For example, if I give you the word marketing, what other words related to it come to mind? Digital marketing, content marketing, email marketing, marketing strategy, marketing plans, marketing template, sales and marketing. The list goes on and on. But there are plenty of words associated with the word marketing. Imagine that word, that marketing word, and the words associated with it as a big word cloud, right? The words that occur the most around marketing are bigger in the cloud. Got it? Pretty easy to visualize so far. Now, let's take a different word, like B2B. Right? When you think of the words associated with B2B, what comes to mind? B2B marketing, sure. B2B sales, B2B commerce, B2B strategy, and so on and so forth. Again, picture that word, B2B, and all the associated words in that word cloud. And again, the words that occur the most around B2B are bigger in that word cloud. Now, imagine those two clouds next to each other. What words do they have in common? How much do they overlap and intersect? B2B and marketing share common words in each other's clouds, like sales, commerce, strategy, right? Those words occur in both. So they have an increased probability when you mash the two word clouds together. So you could imagine how those words would get even bigger in a combined cloud where there's an overlap. And that is the start of how large language models do what they do. Large language models essentially are composed of massive numbers of word clouds for every word that they've seen and the words associated with those words. Unlike the toy example we just talked about, the way these models are made, each individual word in that word cloud is composed of tens or hundreds of thousands of additional words and associations. In the largest models, like GPT-4, there might be even millions of associations for any given word, and those associations also occur among words, phrases, sentences, paragraphs, even documents, right? That marketing word can be associated with so many things in that cloud. For example, there'll be multiple associations for a word, right? Words can have more than one meaning. Apple could refer to the fruit, or it could refer to the computer company, the technology company, and the words around Apple determine which association a model will use. For example, if I mention Apple and computer and history, right, that's going to invoke more than Apple and Macintosh and ripe. We know this from associations. So each of these clusters of association exist inside a large language model as well, which is how it knows to generate the name Steve Jobs if your prompt contains Apple and computer and history and maybe some other related words, even if you never mention Steve Jobs by name, right? He'll mention iPhone or Apple Watch or something, and those words might not be in your prompt, but because those associations, those big clouds have those overlaps, and those overlaps contain things like Steve Jobs, it will bring them out when it generates. When you use a tool like LM Studio or Bing or Bard or ChatGPT and you give it a prompt, it goes into its library of word clouds and takes each word from your prompt, pulls out the cloud, right? Mashes it all together, looks for the overlaps, and those intersections of all those words, that's essentially what it spits out as its answer, formatted in the language of your choice. This is why these tools are so effective and so powerful. They have a knowledge of language that is huge. It's based on how a word relates to every other word that's near it in millions of pages of text. This, by the way, is also what makes the difference between good prompts and bad prompts, between non-creative and creative responses. It drives me up a wall. People say, AI is not creative. Well, your prompt wasn't very creative. Think about it for a second. If you write a short, boring prompt, it's going to create a mash of word clouds that is relatively small, and that means that only the most frequent and therefore the most boring, the most non-creative, the most unoriginal words are going to get returned. Right? If you say, write a blog post about the benefits of email marketing, that's going to generate some really mediocre, really boring content because it's a mediocre, boring prompt. Right? It's gonna return a high-level word cloud mashups, and at best it'll be, bland. There will still be hundreds of thousands of words associated with each word in that prompt, and that combined cloud will still have hundreds of thousands of results, but because we're thinking about the intersections of those clouds, where they overlap, you're just not going to get very much creativity. You're going to get a boring blog post that doesn't say anything new, doesn't put words together in new and novel ways. It just gives you blah, right? Blah. Now, if you use a prompt like, you are a Marketing Props B2B Forum award-winning blogger who writes about B2B marketing and email marketing for the industrial concrete industry, your first task is to draft a blog post about the benefits of a high-frequency email marketing program for an industrial concrete company that sells to state and local governments. Focus on unique aspects of the marketing in the concrete industry and heavy construction. You know CASL, CAN spam, and GDPR. You know email marketing best practices, especially for nurture campaigns and marketing automation systems. Write in a warm, professional tone of voice. Avoid tropes, jargon, and business language. Avoid adverbs. How many word clouds is that? How many word clouds are you going to create with a prompt that large? All those words have clouds, all those overlaps, right? Many, many word clouds, and each cloud of associations is going to have some specific overlaps. The net result, because of all those very specific overlaps, right? You think email marketing over here, and then way over here is like concrete. There's not a ton of overlap, but what there is going to be different. Right? You will get a more tailored, more unique, more creative result because of the way the tools work. You will get things like keeping the conversation going in a high-frequency program for dealing with state and local government agencies. That's what you get when you construct really specific prompts with lots of useful words. When you understand conceptually what's going on under the hood of large language models, it becomes easier to understand how to use them to the best of their capabilities and why non-language tasks, they simply fail most of the time. For example, I'm sure you've seen this, math is really hard for many of these models to get right because they fundamentally do not do computation. They don't compute. They don't do math. They are prediction engines that predict the likelihood of tokens and words. And in this case, numbers would be treated like words. And the numbers that they've learned, they're not adding or subtracting or doing any kind of mathematics. That's why early models had no trouble saying, 2 plus 2 equals 4, but couldn't do 22 plus 7 equals 29 because the former equation occurs much more frequently in written text, in kids' school books and stuff. The latter is fairly rare by comparison, and so the model, because it's not performing any calculations, is just going to wing it and get the answer wrong. And that's what happens a lot of the time when you're doing these non-language tasks. This is also why censorship is so damaging to the structure of these models. Take any common profane word. Take the F word, right? Everybody knows that word. Everybody uses that word to some degree. How often do we use it? How often is it in all of the language on the internet? How many other words are associated with it? Now, take that big model, right, with all those clouds, if you ripped out the F word from there and it would drag along all those other words nearby that get used a lot in combination with it, what's going to happen to those words, right? Their importance will be diminished, even though they're normal, ordinary, useful words, right? People will complain like, oh, this effing weather, right? Well, now, if you pull out the F word, you're going to damage the word weather because you're pulling that whole cloud out and it drags along all these other things. So censorship can be very damaging to the structure of these models. This is also why models behave less or more creatively. They are not intrinsically creative, right? AI is not intrinsically creative. It is a cloud of probabilities being mashed together. When you give a non-creative prompt, you invoke broad probabilities and you get a non-creative result. When you give highly creative, relatively rare prompts that have many combinations of very specific words, you invoke very specific probabilities and get more creative results. That's why in last week's newsletter I was talking about how the number one skill you can have in generative AI is creative thinking, right? Because it's your thinking that goes into the prompts, that goes into the machine, that evokes these probabilities. And the more creative you are in your prompting, the more creative the results will be in return. They're just mirrors. They're just mirrors that reflect our language. Large language models are libraries of probability. Every time we use them, we are invoking probabilities based on the words in our prompts. If we're not getting the results we want, we should examine the words, phrases, sentences, and paragraphs in our prompts and adjust them to add more detail, more relevant words until we get what we want. There is no magic formula, right? There's no secret guide to prompt engineering, despite what you see on LinkedIn, right? No, most instant success with ChatGPT, 75 prompts guaranteed to work. These things don't have any serious credibility because they're ignoring the fundamentals of understanding how language models work. It's all about invoking those probabilities. And whether you say this or that or this or that, as long as you're saying it, as long as you're invoking the right word clouds conceptually, you're going to get to the results you want, right? If you have conversations with these models, the chat in ChatGPT, right? And you use the appropriate language in those conversations to invoke the word clouds that you want to overlap well, you will get what you want from a large language model. And you don't need to buy somebody's ChatGPT prompt course for $4.99. Just learn the architecture and the structure so that you know exactly how these things work, and then you can make them work better for you. All right. Let's talk about what else is in the news this week. We had a good podcast episode I did with Katie on how do you vet an analytics agency, and talked about vetting an agency or an employee. You hire an employee. How do you know what to ask for, what to ask about, things like that. We also had a good live stream this week. I wasn't on it because I was at a conference on crisis comms and generative AI and iOS 17 breaking a whole bunch of traffic, so check that stuff out. I did a private talk this week in Chicago for a group of folks, and it was a lot of fun, a lot of really good questions. And so I'm working on doing more of these. So if that's something you would like to bring to your company or to your association, there's a link in the newsletter. You can go in there and request a conversation with our team to get that arranged. What do we got for jobs this week? We have Analyst Relations Director at Braze, Business Development Representative at Launch Darkly, Chief of Staff and Head Director of Business Practices at Braze, Data Analyst at Indeed.com, Developer Experience Engineer at Launch Darkly, Senior Data Engineer of Marketing Platforms at Confused.com, and VP of Product Marketing at Braze. So lots and lots of hiring there going on. This past week in the Trust Insights newsletter, if you didn't get a copy, go get a copy. Go to trustinsights.ai/newsletter. We looked at the marketing jobs recession, and looks like we've finally hit bottom and they're starting to bounce back up in terms of marketing jobs and things. So it's worth, if it's been a slog to get a position, hopefully things will be starting to improve for you, that the market's starting to improve. What happened in the news this week? Oh, goodness. We had Linda Yaccarino's interview at the Code Conference, which The Verge talked about. The EU warning that X, formerly known as Twitter, is the biggest source of social media disinformation. huge surprise. Like, hey, why haven't advertisers returned? Managing pan-European and global PR networks. Google, this was an interesting one. Google engineers had to, under oath in court, reveal that click-through data, clicks on search results, are ranking signals. That Google for years said, no, it's not a ranking signal. But in a court of law, they did say, yes, click data is used for rankings. Now, whether they change their formulas or waiting, after this, we will see. But that is something that they said they were keeping hidden because they did not want spammers and black hat SEO folks just gaming listings by spawning up click farms. Just click on search listings. Now that that is known, that's exactly what's going to happen. So I'm sure Google will do at least something to mitigate that. Big news in the large language model world. Meta released Llama 2 Long, which is an AI language model. You've heard me talk about Llama in the past. This is a version that has a huge context window, 32,000 tokens, which is about 20,000 words. For an open source model that you can run on your laptop, that's a big deal. That's bigger than GPT 3.5. That is up there. It's starting to knock on Claude's door in terms of what it can handle. It's certainly more than GPT-4 can handle, which I believe is still 16K in the web app. So these tools are now starting to be able to do big chunks of text in the open source versions, which means that it's accessible to you and me without having to pay a fortune to somebody else's computer server room to use their stuff. So that was some big news this week. We also have lots and lots of stuff, spatial computing in airline flight safety from IBM, and some fun stuff. I started shooting some video in new formats this week at Content Marketing World, and I'm going to be doing this again at Marketing Props. I got the iPhone 15, and the camera on it is crazy good. And the video files, when you record at maximum quality, like we're talking for what professional video editors and film companies use, ProRes 422 and Log, like 250 gigabytes each, but they are high quality. Very impressive. So that was fun. And I got a final thing in my fun stuff. I love this series on Insider called How Real Is It? And they have things like Secret Service agent rates 11 protection scenes in movies and TV. And it's always fun listening to these folks talk about like what the movies just don't get right, because we all know the movies don't get some things right, but we don't usually get the details as to why. And these videos are a lot of fun for that. So, upcoming events. We have Marketing Analytics and Data. Oh, no, we did that one. Content Jam is coming up next. Marketing Profs B2B Forum is coming before Content Jam. Marketing Profs is this coming week. Content Jam is in 2 weeks. Then after that is SMPS, the AEC AI Summit, which will be at the end of October, then Digital Now in Denver in November, and then also AI Impact will be online in November, Social Media Marketing World in San Diego in February. So lots and lots of shows piling up real fast. I'm actually going to be on the road pretty much like 3 days of every week between now and Thanksgiving, which I'm very happy about because it's fun to go out and talk to folks like you about artificial intelligence, generative AI, and everything that's happening in the industry. So that is the news for this week. Thank you for being here. As always, thank you for your time and attention. I appreciate it. And I will talk to you next time. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.